People always imagine night shift security guards at big, echoing places like malls or museums. My gig was weirder. I watched over a self-storage facility at the far edge of town. It sprawled out in rows, each unit a rusted red door, all surrounded by that chain-link fence topped with lazy coils of razor wire. The place was climate-controlled, which meant the office was always freezing, and the metal corridors echoed like a meat locker when you walked them after midnight. The owners wanted a live person on site after a string of petty thefts. I guess I needed the money badly enough to say yes. The first time I noticed something was off, it was maybe 1:30 a.m. I was making my hourly walk, keys jangling, flashlight beam bouncing. The units all looked the same, except for unit 139. The metal around the latch was streaked with some oily grime, like someone had smeared it with dirty hands. I crouched to check for forced entry, but the lock was there, solid. I touched the door, and my fingers came away with a faint, sour-smelling residue. Reminded me of old engine oil, but there wasn't a car in sight. I wiped my hand on my pants, tried to brush off the unease as just another night in a weird job. Back in the office, the silence pressed in. The facility sat back from the road, hemmed in by woods, so the only sounds were the hum of the security monitors and the occasional cracking of the old building's pipes. I swiveled through the camera feeds, eyes half-lidded, until a flicker caught my attention. Feed 6, the northwest row, right outside Unit 139. Something moved in the shadow there. I leaned closer, the static swimming around the dark blob of the storage unit. There, a quick, jerky motion, like somebody ducking out of frame. I waited, pulse thumping, but nothing else happened. No sign of forced entry, no alarm. I told myself it was a raccoon or a trick of the light, but I couldn't shake the feeling that whatever it was, it had known I was watching. I tried to read, but the words wouldn't stick. Every so often, I'd glance back at the camera feeds, letting my eyes roam the grainy black and white squares. The clock on the wall ticked louder than usual. At 2:12, the lights in the main hallway blinked off for a split second, plunging the office into darkness before humming back to life. Just a power surge, I thought, but my hands were clammy as I reached for the walkie-talkie. "All clear," I muttered, just to hear my own voice. I forced myself out for the next round. The air in the corridor was cold and sharp, carrying a faint coppery tang, almost like blood, but not quite. My flashlight swept over the doors, making the numbers gleam. When I passed 139, I stopped. There was a soft sound, almost lost in the hum of the refrigeration units. It was like whispering, but too low and garbled to make out words. I pressed my ear to the metal door, and the cold shot up my arm. The noise stopped instantly, leaving only my own shallow breathing. That was the first real crack in my nerves. I retreated to the office, locking the door behind me, telling myself it was nothing. Maybe a gust of wind, maybe some animal trapped inside. But I didn't call the owner. I didn't even write it in the log. I just sat, feeling the sensation of being watched crawl up my spine every time I looked at the monitors. There's a special kind of loneliness that creeps in at 3 a.m., when the world feels hollowed out and your own reflection in the glass looks almost unfamiliar, like it's studying you back. I tried to focus on the soft blue glow of the monitors, but every reflection on the glass made it harder to breathe. My coffee had gone cold. I sipped it anyway, hoping the bitter taste would anchor me, but it just made my teeth ache. I must have zoned out because a sharp metallic clatter jolted me upright. It wasn't on any of the feeds. It sounded close, too close, like it had come from just outside the office door. I waited, holding my breath, listening for footsteps or voices. Nothing but the low whir of the vending machine in the corner. For a moment, I almost convinced myself I'd imagined it. But then, as I edged toward the door to check, I noticed something that hadn't been there before. Greasy smudges on the glass, just at eye level. 5 prints, streaked and unfinished, as if a hand had pressed there and slid away. My fingers trembled as I wiped the palm prints away with a napkin, telling myself it was old grime, maybe from my own hands. But my prints didn't look like that. These were longer, the fingers almost too thin, leaving a faint, unpleasant smell behind. A mix of rust and mildew that seemed to linger in my nose, even after I'd thrown the napkin out. The rest of the facility was silent, but the silence had changed. It felt charged, like after a thunderstorm, when everything is waiting for the next strike. I tried to distract myself, scrolling through my phone's news feed, but every headline blurred together. The only thing I could focus on was the hum from the cameras and the sharp, uneven ticking of the wall clock. At 3:41, the monitors glitched again. This time, it wasn't a flicker. The picture on feed 6 distorted, lines crawling over the image until it was almost unreadable. I tapped the screen, hoping it was just some cheap wiring acting up, but the static only got worse. In that snowstorm of white noise, an outline started to form. It wasn't just a shadow. This looked like a person, standing in front of Unit 139, not moving, not turning, just there. The figure was too tall, its head bent at an angle that made my skin crawl. For a split second, I thought I saw its face, blank, pale, wrong. No features, but the sense of being stared at was overwhelming. I blinked, and the feed snapped back to normal. The corridor outside 139 was empty. No sign anyone had ever been there. Still, my hands wouldn't stop shaking. I tried to radio the station's backup. Protocol, in case of a break-in. But the walkie sputtered with static. No answer. I tried again, voice barely steady. But all I got was silence and a faint warbling crackle that sounded almost like breathing. I paced the office, chewing at the skin on my thumb until it stung. Every few minutes, I forced myself to check the monitors, counting each row of doors like a prayer, but nothing moved. The hours stretched. My mind kept drifting back to that door, 139. The oily residue, the fingerprints, the strange sounds. I told myself there had to be a logical explanation. Old chemicals leaking, condensation, a trick of the wiring. But the excuses felt thinner each time I repeated them. Desperation finally got the better of me. I grabbed the spare flashlight and cracked the office door. The air outside felt different now. Thicker, heavier, as if the storage facility itself was holding its breath. I moved quietly, shoes squeaking on the polished floor. My flashlight beam was unsteady, but I forced myself toward the northwest row. As I approached 139, the cold grew sharper, biting through my jacket. The hallway lights flick. Air it overhead, buzzing louder than I remembered. The whole row of units shivering in their pale glow. I kept my eyes on the faded numbers as I counted them. 135, 137, then 139. I stopped a few feet away. The greasy smear around the handle had grown, spreading in odd finger-like streaks up the door. The smell was stronger now. Thick and metallic, burning the back of my throat. I told myself to just check the lock and get it over with. Nothing in there, but someone's forgotten boxes and old furniture. My hand hovered, reluctant, then grabbed the padlock. It was cold, far colder than it should have been, even for steel in winter. I squeezed, trying to pull the lock up, just to prove it was still sealed tight. It didn't budge. But as I leaned closer, I heard it again, whispering, just beneath the hum of the lights. It was clearer this time, not words, but a cadence, a rise and fall like someone muttering to themselves behind the metal. I shone my flashlight through the thin gap at the bottom of the door. There was nothing, just a wedge of darkness, dust, and a single, slow movement. Something was shifting, almost imperceptibly, catching the light. A pale shape slipped back into shadow. My lungs felt too small. I called out, quietly at first, then louder, my voice echoing between the corrugated walls. "Hello? If you're in there, you're not supposed to be. You need to come out." Silence, except for that whispering, now fainter, almost mocking. I stepped back, the urge to run nearly overwhelming. But the protocol drilled into me wouldn't let go. I had to log an incident, call it in. I fumbled with my phone, but the screen flickered, refusing to load anything but a spinning circle. The walkie was just dead air. I stared down the length of the corridor, half hoping someone else would appear. Another guard, a stray driver, anyone. No one came. The lights overhead snapped off, plunging me into darkness so sudden I stumbled. My flashlight beam wobbled wildly, painting streaks on the walls. When the overheads flickered back, just for a heartbeat, a long shadow stretched out from beneath 139, reaching almost to my feet. It was impossibly thin, spidery, and as the light steadied, it vanished. My mouth went dry. I turned, meaning to get back to the office, to get behind a locked door and call for help, but something scraped from inside the unit, metal against metal, a dragging sound. I froze, listening as the noise repeated, steady, deliberate, as if someone inside was moving closer to the door. Another whisper, this time raspy, almost pleading. I couldn't make out the words, but the tone was hungry. I backed away, step by step. My mind spun through explanations. Maybe a squatter, maybe a trapped animal. None of them made sense. I'd walked these halls for weeks, and never heard a thing. Then the lock rattled under my hand, a subtle movement, small enough I could almost convince myself I'd imagined it. But then, it happened again. Just a tiny, patient tug, as if something inside was feeling for a weakness. Panic won out. I bolted back toward the office, feet slipping on the smooth floor. The corridor twisted behind me. The rows of storage doors looked wrong. Somehow, each one identical, but the numbers were off, repeating, skipping. For a few seconds I wasn't sure if I was running in circles or the place itself was shifting around me. Every door I passed seemed to have a greasy smear, a faint handprint, as if something had brushed past moments before. I reached the office, slammed,